Do you encounter folks who are resistant to the idea of thinking about retirement and succession? And how do you kind of encourage people to start uh, really thinking deeply about that?
Yes, I encounter many people who are resistant. That doesn't mean that they are approaching it in bad faith or they're just trying to take the last dollar or something from the firm. It doesn't mean that at all.
Mhm.
I mean, in rare situations, yes, but generally, these are senior lawyers who had a lot to do with building up the firm, whether it's small firm or large firm. And they want to do right by their clients. But I also know that there's a whole overlay of issues that go in with, in my tiny little world, we call it the R word. We don't sometimes say the whole word, but call it the R word. And also, one of the things that I've tried to do, if people are hesitant about that, I've tried to frame it, which I think is true, and that is succession planning is more of a map to a new destination. Now, retirement could be one of those.
Have you given thought to who will take over your law practice when you decide to retire? This is a big question and one that's often overlooked amidst the hustle and bustle of running a law practice. Welcome to the Lawyer Millionaire Podcast, a show focused on empowering lawyers and law firm owners to grow extraordinary wealth. I'm your host, Darren Wurz, financial planner for law firm owners. Today, we're diving deep into the topic of succession planning with someone who has both lived it and advised others on it. Our guest is David Ernst, a respected peer who retired from law practice after a 37-year career as a litigation attorney focused on food safety. David's experience ranges from serving as a managing attorney to firm president and being a part of the firm-wide succession planning at Davis Wright. His extensive experience in law firm leadership and management, combined with his subject expertise in succession planning, makes him the perfect person to share insights on planning for law firm continuity. David, welcome to the show.
Darren, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here, and that's very kind of you to for your introduction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And succession planning, we've talked a lot about on this show. We did a whole little series on it not too long ago. And so we're delighted to have another expert come on and share a unique perspective. I think it's unique, coming from a little bit larger of a law practice. I think we talked a lot about the solo and small firms. You're more in the mid-size space, and there's a lot of succession planning that goes on there. But before we dive into all of that, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
You bet. As you noted, I was a practicing lawyer for 37 years. I retired from law practice last fall. I was a litigator primarily, and in the most of my career was spent in a really narrow area of food safety, representing the industry on nationwide outbreaks. Really enjoyed that, and really enjoyed that narrow practice. I also was lucky enough to be involved in a lot of firm leadership and management roles in my two law firms. I only worked at two law firms in my career, and you mentioned a couple. And just through those experiences, especially maybe as first as a managing attorney for a firm, my mid-sized firm, was involved in a lot of efforts regarding succession planning, and really became interested in that a long time ago. Just some things I learned, some, I think, mistakes that were made by all parties, and thought that maybe, after I finished practice, I could take a run at doing that and advancing the ball on lawyer succession planning, because I think it's so important for many constituencies, which we'll get into. So started that consulting business earlier this year in 2023, and have really enjoyed some opportunities I've had to work with law firms and lawyers.
Yeah. So you got an interest in succession planning early on. What were some of the big mistakes that you saw happening that kind of sparked that interest?
I would say the biggest, and what I think continues to be the biggest, is a lack of communication. Um, and I think I understand the reasons why there can be a lack of communication, but I think a lack of communication by the senior attorney for some concerns that they have if they say something to their firm or if they say it too early. A lack of understanding and communication from the firm management in terms of how to approach succession planning, how to um, truly honor the legacy of what senior lawyers have built in a firm. And I think there's a way to do that which allows all parties to come out feeling good about their roles. And then a real interest of mine is bringing up the next generation of lawyers and making sure that they understand their role in succession planning and also that they see a healthy firm talking about succession planning. When they're not talking and they don't see a path, that is when people, maybe especially younger lawyers that have options, leave.
Yeah.
And you don't want your firm to be in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, that's you hit the nail on the head, I think there. I talked with people, had people on the show who've talked about their history and their story and how they maybe were at a bigger firm and decided to leave for that very reason. There wasn't a pathway for them. They didn't feel like the firm was taking succession planning seriously. And so, if you're thinking about your own future, your own career prospects, you need to make sure that the firm is going to be around, and the succession planning is key and integral to that. This may be an obvious question, but maybe you have something you can add. Why should lawyers and law firms care about succession planning?
That's a great question. I get asked about that, and I do have an answer.
Okay.
They should care for a number of reasons. One, the continuation of the law firm. Many of these senior lawyers have built up a firm over decades and developed an incredible client following. And they want to do right. They have to do right by the clients. And so no client expects or probably wants you to work forever. But the clients want the comfort of knowing that you are thinking of their interests and so taking steps for whenever you decide to retire or go on your next journey that's not retirement, to make sure that those clients are being handled just like the care that you gave. Second reason would, again, I mentioned this building up of a younger generation of lawyers. We have a huge demographic shift going on at least with lawyers, and I think also with law firms. I know also with law firms, and we need to be making sure that our younger lawyers become great rainmakers, great community leaders, and great leaders within their firm. And if they see a path, um, they're very much more likely to stay.
Yeah.
I know succession planning certainly isn't the only thing a young lawyer looks at for the future. I understand, but I think it's very important that they understand the culture of the firm. So I think I've answered several reasons, but
Yeah.
yeah, obviously I'm a pretty big proponent. I'll just add one other thing, and that is
Mhm.
just for your own happiness.
Mm.
Having done my own succession plan last year and executed on it with a few bumps, but executed on my plan, I left law practice just feeling great about the experiences I've had, but also excited about, some next steps that I'm working on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious if you can maybe tell us the story of your succession plan and how you kind of set that up and went through that process.
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief, but I obviously I was interested in this, so I tried to do a lot of reading. I had some experiences in my management roles, some things I didn't want to do as a senior lawyer, and some things I wanted to do as a senior lawyer. I also spent about 5 years ago, I went on a little listening tour during a summer, and I met with and interviewed people who had just finished their primary career and were either retired or possibly moving on to something else. And it wasn't just lawyers; it was mostly lawyers. But I interviewed some other people too, and professional occupations about how they approach that. And so I took away from that, and then really started my journey pretty early. Once I had, I had thought about a date for a while. I sat with it for a summer, didn't tell anyone except my spouse about a date I was thinking, and then about a year in advance, I started fully, embracing it, telling everybody, telling clients, setting up meetings, and just tried to do a lot of things to make sure that my successors were ready to go. And so when I was done, they stepped in, and hopefully it's gone. I believe it's gone very smoothly.
Yeah. In that process, were there some key things you learned or realized that you hadn't thought about before?
You bet. I think I wrote a LinkedIn post on this not too long ago, so I can kind of remember it. But I think one is everything takes longer than you think.
Mm,
Um, Even if you and your clients are, everybody's approaching this and your successors are approaching this in a very good faith way, it's just that it takes longer. So if you want to set up a meeting with clients, preferably in person rather than kind of telling this over an email or something. You set up a meeting. Well, they've got things they're doing every day. Not that they're not interested and care, but it just takes longer than you think. You're obviously more involved in this than anybody else is. So that's one thing I learned. Um, so I kind of, I started a year out. I probably easily could have started a year and a half out, and it would have been better, I think, if I had done it that. So that's one thing I learned. I think another thing I learned is that, making sure that I gave the opportunities to successor lawyers early. Most of them had been already working with me with clients and direct with clients, but just making sure that I was there even after they took over a case for 6 months in the background, so that they could come to me. Once you leave, sure, they can call you and talk to you, but you got to remember, uh, I'm not a member of the firm, so there's no attorney-client privilege.
hmm
And so you need to be sensitive about things like that. And I wanted them to, hit the ground running. And I love my firm, but I was done. I didn't want to be involved in those things, nor
hmm
should I be. So those are some things that I learned along the way.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I find this is interesting because I love what you've done, and in the fact that you actually, wanted to retire, you made a plan and you went through it and accomplished it. Um, and hats off to you, for for going through that process. What I've when I survey and you look at the legal industry, I find that maybe a lot of people are not thinking about retirement. Was there an aha moment where you kind of decided, oh, you know what, I would like to retire? Or was this always something you were kind of planning and striving for?
I would say the latter. It probably was, my dad retired at a fairly young age and did some consulting. That obviously was an influence on me. I watched a lot of lawyers as to how they approach this, and I learned some things, and probably learned more things than your average lawyer, just because I was also in firm leadership about this. I I know there is a big psychological component to all this, which we can talk about, and was not immune from any of those things, in terms of professionals and the extent that their identity is wrapped up in what they do. That's not a negative. It's just something that we need to be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, I always, I started practicing law when I was 24, and that's pretty young. I did the K through JD route, and I had a late birthday as it was, so I was a pretty young lawyer, and had a great career, but just knew, a long time ago that I wanted to try some other things. And,
Okay.
for me, that included I'm doing some mediation in my little narrow niche of food safety, and then I'm doing this succession planning. And they're very different, but I really enjoy both.
Yeah. Do you encounter folks who are resistant to the idea of thinking about retirement and succession? And how do you kind of encourage people to start uh, really thinking deeply about that?
Yes, I encounter many people who are resistant. That doesn't mean that they are approaching it in bad faith, or they're just trying to take the last dollar or something from the firm. Doesn't mean that at all.
Mhm.
I mean, in rare situations, yes, but generally, these are senior lawyers who had a lot to do with building up the firm, whether it's small firm or large firm, and they want to do right by their clients. But I also know that there's a whole overlay of issues that go in with, in my tiny little world, we call it the R word. We don't sometimes say the whole word, but call it the R word. And also, one of the things that I've tried to do, if people are hesitant about that, I've tried to frame it, which I think is true, and that is succession planning is more of a map to a new destination. Now, retirement could be one of those. But what if you are asked to assume almost a full-time leadership position in your firm? What if you're in a mid-sized firm or a large firm or a small firm, and you're asked to kind of be the managing partner? Well, you can't spend more than 24 hours a day. And so it's very likely that then I had to do this when I became a managing partner. You have to cut back on your law practice. Well, you have to have successors there and be
Mhm.
ready. So what if you even want to take a sabbatical? I often encourage people to try that. If your firm has a sabbatical program, or even if it doesn't, take a month off, and seriously take a month off. You have to get ready for that by making sure successors are in place. And it's kind of a good practice run for going through succession planning for retirement or some other position. So those are some things that I've talked to people about in approaching the fear that goes into this discussion. Just
Yeah.
having the discussion and trying to normalize succession planning culture within a firm is a huge, huge benefit.
Yeah, yeah. That's great advice. I like that idea of taking a sabbatical to kind of try out retirement almost and kind of get
Right,
the feel for it. I've often talked to people about, if you're thinking about maybe you want to move to Florida or something, well, maybe go spend 6 months there, 3 months there, and try it out first to see how you like it.
right, right.
Um, but great advice. Retirement doesn't have to be, and it's not the end.
No,
It's
I hope not.
no.
I don't think it is, though.
but I think it has that connotation often in people's minds.
I think it
Yeah.
is getting better, but I think it does. Also, the other thing I tell people is there's nothing wrong with retirement either. I'm happy to say I'm retired from law practice. I'm not retired from life,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
retired from law practice, and I'm happy to say it. But I'm
Yeah.
not a retirement coach.
Yeah.
I'm, if people want to stay at their firm forever, and I hear that, well, okay, that's fine. But even those people need to do succession planning.
Yeah.
And so that's not my jam. My interest is in succession planning, and retirement obviously can be a part of that. Um, and it was definitely for me.
Yeah, yeah. So if you were to, work with somebody, let's say somebody comes to you and they're like, okay, I want to retire in 2 years, right?
Mhm.
What would be some of the key elements of creating a succession plan for them? Where would you begin with that person?
It's a great question, and I've been doing it this year. The first thing is, um, have you picked a date? And a lot of people will come and say they have an idea, and usually it's in that 1 to 2 time frame when people want to talk to me about that. It can be a little further out, which is great too. Hopefully, it's not at the 3 or 4 month time frame because that's difficult.
Yeah.
But it happens. But yeah, have you picked a date? Okay, well, let's work backward from that. Let's talk about, well, what successors do you have in place? How much hands-on work have they had with the clients? Do you have some particular, I call them micro specialties? Every lawyer has something that they do that probably no one else in their firm quite does the same thing. I mean, you can be a real estate lawyer, or you can be, a particular litigator of a particular kind of subject matter, but you may have done certain, aspects of a real estate transaction or a certain part of litigation that, depending on the size of your firm, maybe no one else is doing that. So you need to make a list of these micro specialties, look at and take a roster of people who do people know that within your firm? And if they don't, we need to train up some folks, or possibly, when working with firm leadership, bring in some lateral people to do that. Now, that doesn't happen in 3 months. That happens in 1 to 3 years in terms
Mhm.
of that. So earlier the better on these things. So I talked to him about that. I talked to him about, how to talk to clients about this, how notification, when to notify is a big issue for people, when to notify your firm, when to notify your clients. Talk to them about the compensation. It's an issue. For some people, it's a big issue. Other people, not as big an issue. But I'm a huge believer in compensating senior lawyers in their last couple of years for the transparent succession planning, and not compensating them on the usual metrics. Every firm is a little different, but usual metrics, hours and originations, things like that. So that's a little bit of my mission as well. But I'm not a well, I've done a lot of compensation committee work in law firms, but I just think that that's hugely important.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. What would be kind of your optimal design for how a firm would design that, a firm-wide succession plan, or an orderly succession plan, and how they would compensate senior lawyers as they are, maybe buying out their partnership interest?
Yeah. Well, in my world, and I have to admit my background, and that is mid-sized to an AmLaw 100 firm. So, I have no experience in working at a 1 to 5 lawyer firm, and I know there are differences there. But I think there's some similarities too. But if I were king, yeah, I would take the assuming this is a very important assumption, assuming that the lawyer will be transparent with the firm, with the clients, and immediately start doing open and transparent succession planning, then I would be totally in favor of some kind of system that essentially pays the lawyer over 1 or 2 years, maybe the same that they would have been paid when they were full-time practicing and billing, whatever hours a year.
Hmm.
I would expect that their billable hours would go way down. I would expect that if they were a firm, many firms track origination of clients, credits. I would make the lawyer, not make them, I would just tell them that part of this is you need to give those credits to your successors.
Hmm.
And that some people look at me cross-eyed when I suggest that. And some people say, that's a pretty good idea. Because why do I need origination credits in my last year of
Hmm.
practice? I gave it all away. I'm not asking for any medal or anything. I just did it because that helped the new lawyers. And I was already, I had a great arrangement with my firm. So that's something I'd do. And then finally, I would encourage the succession planning behavior by maybe if you give your firm 2 years notice, you get your capital back faster. Maybe if you give them 4 months notice, you get your capital back over a longer period of time. I think
Yeah.
that's a system that would encourage some succession planning behaviors.
Yeah, you could kind of create some incentives there
Right.
for people to do things faster or, give more time and do things more efficiently. And I like what you said there. I think there has to be a spirit of generosity. It's got to be a win-win for
Right.
all parties. There's got to be a little give and take for everybody. So that's the right attitude to have there for sure.
I'll tell you that one of the most professionally satisfying things I had in my career, whether it was, trying cases or doing lots of different kinds of legal work. But the last year when a client would call me kind of out of the blue and say, "Hey, Dave, thank you for introducing me to or getting me hooked up with your successor. I'm really having a good relationship with them and really appreciate the thought you put into that." That's a pretty cool thing for a senior lawyer.
Yeah.
Um, and that can't put a price tag on that. And so that's one of the great things about succession planning is the benefits that come back to you as the senior lawyer. If you can give benefits to your successors, great. You're going to get a lot of benefits too.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds very satisfying, to hear that kind of feedback, I'm sure. Well, our time is flying by here. I have a couple more questions I want to
Sure.
squeeze in here. One real quickly, what role does, on the money topic, what role does financial planning play in all of this, do you see?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, you are much more qualified to talk about that than I am. Um, Obviously, when I talk to people, it's not going to surprise you that even senior lawyers are sometimes have hesitancy about retiring because of the money issue or the perceived money issue.
Mhm.
I don't have an expertise in financial planning. Um, I'm learning too as I go here, but I guess I felt comfortable enough that I could do this. Maybe I'd even have these little side tussles gigs here that I and could make a little money on as well. But yes, everybody and everybody's circumstances are different,
Mhm.
as you know. So you have to get to that point. I have also learned in my very amateur psychologist role that maybe concerns about money may be a proxy for some other things. So
Mm.
I'm sure you know about that too. But I've observed that, including looking in the mirror. I had some observations about that. So, I don't know. I hope that's helpful. I certainly don't want to try to opine on financial planning because I'm still learning.
Sure, sure. Well, I think you did a great service there in advocating for having some confidence and doing some planning because yeah, if you have some confidence in your numbers and you feel good, you're going to be more apt to engage in these conversations. I think a little bit
I
more
wouldn't have
seriously.
mind reading your book there in the background before I retired. I didn't read your book until after I retired, but I've only been retired for a year, so I think I can get some benefit out of that.
That's
Thank
fair.
you
That's
for
fair.
writing it.
For sure. Well, Dave, one more question here, and it is, what is your millionaire mission? And maybe you're living it now, but what I mean by that is, what's your driving purpose, or is there a big goal that you're striving for?
Yeah, I want to. Um, I just learned a lot in law practice, just by doing it for a long time, and I'd like to try to pass on some things to lawyers, maybe especially about succession planning, which makes their life a little bit easier and makes them willing to look at something and approach something and kind of say, well, maybe it's not as scary as I thought it would be, or, maybe it's okay to retire. And also the great benefit, enjoyment that comes out of seeing a new generation of lawyers do things. They're not going to do it like you. And that's good. They're going to bring new perspectives to clients' relationships. That's really good. I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. So do a lot of other lawyers I know. So I guess that's my millionaire moment is that I'm gonna keep doing this for a while as long as I'm having fun generally, and if I can get through to a few lawyers and it's meaningful, then I'm gonna be a happy person.
Well said. Well said. Well, Dave, if folks want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, where should they go?
Couple of places. I have a website, Ernst Bernick, BERNICK.com, where I practice or I do my consulting work with a very good and dear friend of mine, Carol Bernick, who is has a long history with law firms and management and is very, very interested in helping women lawyers get into leadership positions. So we do some different things, but we also kind of have the same values about lawyer development. So ernstbernick.com, and then I'm on LinkedIn and learning about LinkedIn and doing some posting, mostly about succession planning, but I'll throw in here's some things I learned about practicing law over the years too. So,
Very cool.
and all my contact information is there on both the website and on LinkedIn.
All right. And we'll make sure we get all that in the show notes. Big thanks to Dave Ernst for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for joining us as well. If you found this episode valuable, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback makes a huge difference and helps us reach more law firm owners like yourself. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes. And finally, head on over to thelawyermillionaire.com to learn more about me or grab a copy of my book. Thank you once again, and I will see you next time. I'm your host, Darren Wurz, on The Lawyer Millionaire.